All right. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate your time today. Looking forward to a really engaging and energetic session. Allison, if you want to hop over to the next slide, just super quick agenda so you know what we're in for. I'll spend a few minutes telling you a bit about myself, my story, my career, how I made the transition. I won't spend a ton of time on that. I know that's not really what you're here for. You probably care less about my biography and more about your chance to ask some questions and get some answers. So once I just give you a bit of context about who I am and why I feel qualified to have this conversation with you all, I'll share a bit about my perspective as a hiring manager, some general do's and don'ts, things that I have hired for, things that I look for when I do hire, and then we'll have probably 3/4 of this hour for you all to do some Q&A. So let's go ahead and jump in, and I'll tell you a bit more about myself and my background. So I began my career as a high school English teacher, and I was certified to teach English and history and taught for 5 years and at the high school level. And then I also spent 2 years teaching at the community college level, taught adult education ESL, and that's really where I figured out that adult education is where I wanted to spend the rest of my career. I absolutely loved teaching. I feel like it was what I was put on this earth to do, loved my teaching career. But back in the era and in the state where I was teaching in rural North Carolina. My salary for most of those years was $29,000, and it just was not the quality of life that was really sustainable for me and for my family going forward. And I'll never forget, there was one day, all the students walked out of my classroom. I sat in the empty room by myself, and I just said out loud in the empty room, "I don't want to do this anymore." And I didn't even know I was feeling that way until I said it out loud in the empty room. And I just thought, I have to figure out something else. And I didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do. I had no hope of teaching full-time at the community college because, as you can see, I was an adjunct. They weren't hiring full-timers. That's a different saga for a different day. And I wasn't really sure where to go. So 10 years ago, I had never heard of instructional design. So I spent the next couple of years really just figuring out where I go from here. I was a patient care coordinator in a doctor's office, kind of a fancy title for the person who works at the front desk. So did that for a little while. I was an executive assistant. That was a really toxic work environment. I was not there long. And then I was a barista for a little while in my early 30s. Again, just really trying to figure out, what do I do with myself? And thank goodness I found my first instructional design role. Again, at this time, wasn't really aware that this was an industry. But I found a local employer in the city where I was living, and they were hiring what they called a training and development specialist. And they put in the job description, they were looking for someone who had training or teaching experience. And I just thought, this sounds like something I can do. And one of the things they had me do during the interview process was actually teach a lesson on their corporate values. And that was something I felt super comfortable doing, and got the job, spent the next 2 years of my life in this role. And that's really where I discovered corporate instructional design. And so that was a really great entry point, that T&D specialist. That role was a little bit of everything. So I did instructional design. So I did like the typical corporate training, training their corporate employees, what they needed them to know. I did a bit of e-learning design. That's where I first learned to use Articulate Storyline, which is one of my favorite tools to this day. Did some training facilitation, did some training coordination, so the scheduling of training, did a bit of LMS administration work. We actually changed LMS systems while I was working there, so did all the work of tearing down the one system and rebuilding the new one. So that was really a catch-all role. I got a little bit of everything. And I realized the actual instructional design piece, the consulting with clients internally, figuring out what their learning needs are, and creating learning solutions to help them solve their problems, that was my favorite part of the role. So second corporate job at a different place a few years in, instructional designer. And that's the company that I've been with for the next 6 years, really. And so I've come up through the team. I was promoted from being an instructional designer to senior instructional designer to now manager of the team that I was once working on. So that's, again, just snapshot of how I've spent the last really 15 years of my career, to give you a bit of context, really, where I'm coming from. So I'll tell you a bit more about the team that I'm currently managing. So Allison, we can hop over to the next slide. My current title is Senior Director of Learning Experience. I work at a large enterprise software company, and I lead a team of 9 individuals. And it's a mix of instructional designers. We have an LMS admin, we have a curriculum manager, we have a technical writer, really all the roles that you commonly see in the corporate L&D space. Some of the questions we've received for this event here tonight are, what roles are available in corporate L&D? And this is a snapshot of my team and the roles that we have. And what we found is that as our team evolves and grows over time, we have different needs, and we need to meet different needs within our business. The biggest distinction between instructional designer and senior instructional designer, it really comes down to experience and really their proficiency at doing the consulting and the content creation work that we do. We have a curriculum manager. That's exactly what it sounds like. A lot of people in the corporate world are not familiar with the term curriculum. It is a very K-12 word, but that role is exactly what it sounds like. That individual manages a core curriculum for a core program that my team offers to our employees. They're responsible for the overall design, but also the execution and the strategy behind that program. We have one person I call the learning analyst, and that's our LMS admin. The LMS is the learning management system, and that's the piece of software that houses all of the training. So anything my team creates is then uploaded into the LMS. Learners encounter all of our training through the LMS, and then the LMS does all the back-end reporting and attendance and record keeping and things like that. So we have one person whose sole function is to do the administration work of all the items going into and out of the LMS. And then I also have a technical writer. That's the one individual on my team who actually doesn't have a background in education, but they really play a special role. If you're familiar with the ADDIE model, ADDIE, they're the second D in ADDIE. They're the developer. And so where the designers spend a lot of their time doing that design consulting, meeting with stakeholders, deciding what asset is going to be the best need for the training problem someone is having, when they need that second set of hands to come in and build the thing, again, that second D in ADDIE, the development work, that's the role the technical writer plays in my roles, is helping build a lot of the things. Within our company, our audience of learners is internal. You'll find some instructional design teams are internal only, meaning they're only training their employers' employees. And some people are more external facing, so like training customers of the company that you work for. There's a bit of nuance, and some people prefer one side or the other, or don't really have preference. And my team creates just about everything you can in the corporate instructional design space. We make e-learning courses, we make documents, videos, infographics, we design training sessions, we manage programs for the new hire onboarding within my company. So again, just about everything an instructional designer can do in a corporate setting, someone on my team does. And I did the work myself before I managed the team. So a lot of experience here, definitely seen the full gamut of things that you can find in a corporate instructional design team. So one final slide here before we kick it over to the Q&A. I just wanted to give you a bit of guidance, what I look for as a hiring manager. And the caveat here, all of the opinions and all the answers to all the questions we're going to get to are mine and mine alone. So nothing that I'm saying here tonight is representative of, my employer or, any previous employers. It's really just my experience. But as someone who has hired 9 individuals in the last 3 years, has applied for a number of jobs myself, I've been on both ends of the hiring process many, many times in my career. Wanted to give you my words of wisdom. So in general, one of the things I look for typically when I hire into my team is formal education in education. So I think this is the exact right audience to tell that to. The fact that all of you, I'm making the assumption, have degrees in education, that's a win. It never ceases to surprise me how rare that is in corporate education and corporate L&D. A lot of my peers and a lot of my team members' peers on other teams that do similar work to us don't have degrees in education. And so the fact that all of you are coming into this career with degrees and with experience working in education is really an asset that you have. Even if your experience is not a one-to-one to match, you have experience, you have formal knowledge in how to design effective, engaging assessments, effective, engaging learning experiences. So it's really a feather in your cap and something to be proud of and something to highlight through the interview process that you have that formal education in education. We also tonight got a lot of questions in advance about how much experience. And if it's any comfort to any of you listening to this, we got questions from people saying, I only have 1 or 2 or 3 years teaching experience. Is that too little? All the way through, I have a couple decades of teaching experience. Is that too much? And so if it's any comfort to know, anxiety runs both ends of the spectrum, from too little experience to too much. And really, you want to find the role that is the sweet spot for you. And I have hired by design onto my team people who are both inexperienced and very experienced. And to me, that's part of building a diverse team with diverse backgrounds. Part of building a team with diversity of thought. I wouldn't want a team of all professionals who are all starting out in their careers, nor would I want a team of all very senior, very tenured people who, I like to have that healthy balance. And so there's really benefits to being on both ends of that spectrum. Something else that I look for when I hire is portfolios. So I anticipate there being a lot of questions around portfolios, where to house them, what to put in them. So I'll give you a few best practices, again, of things that I look for and things that I've seen others really do well. So when I look for portfolios, overall, I look for knowledge of adult learning theories, and I look for application of that in portfolio work samples. So when you think about including a work sample in your portfolio, probably the number one most important to think about is, are you teaching someone something? And are you showing evidence of the theories that we've all learned when we went to school and have put to practice in our work as educators? A big phrase in corporate L&D is adult learning theories. It's really not all that different from what a lot of us have done as educators before. But I think the biggest hallmark of an adult learning theory is just making it immediately relevant to your learner. When we teach students in a K-12 setting, and they ask that question that we all love so much, when am I going to use this someday? You have to really sell them on the fact that they're going to use that knowledge someday. The biggest change to an adult learner in the workplace, they have to use it today or tomorrow or immediately, or it's really of no value to them. So helping someone do something. To that fact, it's really helpful to have work samples created for adults. So think back about any experiences that you've had. If you've ever done a training for your peers in your school district, if you've ever led an in-service or led a workshop or taught someone else how to do something at the adult level, that makes a great work sample. I think teachers sometimes face a bit of bias that, they only work with children. They could never come here and work with adults. I don't find that to be true, but that is an unfair rumor that you do hear time and time again. And I think that if your portfolio really only includes materials aimed at children, you're not necessarily doing yourself any favors and showing that you could readily go step into a setting where you're working with adults. So that's one piece of advice I have. Something else I look for in portfolios, just examples of critical thinking and reflection. Some of the strongest portfolios I've seen have a little bit of reflection on why they chose a certain piece or why they built it, why they chose a certain tool to build that piece, what they learned while doing it, why they think this is successful. We're not looking for great detail here. It does not need to be an essay, but a simple paragraph, a couple of bullet points, tell us why you chose this piece, what we can learn about you by looking at this piece, why this highlights your skills, something you're passionate about, something you're knowledgeable about. And that reflection really helps me understand who you are as a practitioner. Next up, I look for effective or innovative use of design tools. If the word innovative scares you right now, don't let it scare you. But just, you look for a good use of the tool. The classic example of what I'd say not to do, if the tool that you're using provides templates, don't take the template, customize it very little, and then just slap it in your portfolio as is. Put your own spin on it. So effective, interesting use of the design tools. something more than just those really basic, boring click next courses that we all hate. That's not a good reflection of who you are as a designer to put a really basic template or something that's not super engaging in a portfolio piece. That leads me to my next point, engaging content. Depending on the industry that you'll be working in as a corporate instructional designer, you might not have the most interesting subject matter to work with. Luckily, as teachers, I think we all have experienced teaching things that may not be the most interesting topics. So you all are highly, highly skilled in taking boring topics and making them interesting. And that is a skill that you will continue to use and grow and develop as a corporate instructional designer. So anything that you can do to engage your audience, just like literally to make it interesting, to get their attention, to make it actionable, all the things that you do to hold your students' attention, that really still applies in the workforce. Hopefully it's not coming as a surprise. Adults are just as bad about being on their phones during training, multitasking, checking email, checking social media when they're in training, turning on the videos that you spent hours building, pressing play, and they walk away and go get lunch. So anything that you can do to really make engaging content that is going to hold their interest and be effective, that's a win. And then next up in portfolios, I look for quality of writing. Several, I may have a bit of bias here that I was an English teacher myself, but several members of my team were English majors, if not English teachers themselves. We do a lot of writing as instructional designers. One of the things that unfortunately becomes part of our job description oftentimes is editing someone else's writing, whether it's taking someone else's document and editing it to be more concise, to be more clear, to be more action-oriented. Maybe we write a script for a video that someone else then records. It's a very common thing whenever we have I call them the talking head videos, the executive who wants to deliver some sort of message to an audience. We oftentimes write their messaging for them. That's kind of one of the secrets, is a lot of executives don't write their own communications or their own scripts. Oftentimes we're behind that. And so quality of writing is really an important skill. Anything that you can do in your portfolios to show off writing is really a win and something to your advantage. On the topic of writing, I get a lot of questions around, should I include a cover letter with my resume? This one's, you're going to find different opinions depending on who you ask. And so not all applications require cover letters. And even if they are required, not all hiring managers read them. It surprises me. I oftentimes hear other hiring managers say, I don't read cover letters. I just go by what's in the interview, or I go by what's on the resume. Personally, I am someone who reads cover letters. I put a lot of stock in them. I think the individual took time preparing them, took time writing them. I see them as one more writing sample. And it's a chance for me to get to know that individual and hear their story and kind of connect some of the dots of what's on their resume. So cover letters are something that I definitely read. But quite honestly, it's a mixed bag. Some people read them, some people don't. I think you're never going to hurt yourself by including a cover letter, but it's not always necessary. That's my perspective and my experience with that. Before we hop forward to the next section, which is my general interview do's and don'ts, do we have any questions about what I've covered so far? I expected portfolios might be kind of a hot topic. So if we have any questions, we can pause here for a minute, or we can go ahead and move on.
Well, we could answer the question that came through on portfolios here too, Laurel, if you want.
Sure.
So this wasn't in the chat here, but it was one we got on the general spreadsheet. There were a couple of things that came through on portfolios kind of later. Essentially, you've covered a lot of it, which is what should go in your portfolio and what was the differentiation between portfolios. I think actually you've covered all of because it was just a general what should go in it. How do you evaluate portfolios of potential AD hires is how one of them was phrased. So is there any particular evaluation you apply? These are the things you look for, but is there anything specific that you apply? I know some companies do and some don't, but have you seen anything like that?
you're all allowed to laugh when I say this, but once a teacher, always a teacher. I literally made a rubric, honestly, and really simple 5-point scale. But I looked for exactly these things. I looked for, is there evidence of knowledge of adult learning theories? How would I rate their writing? How engaging is their content? How effective? Like literally the things you see here on this slide, I made a rubric. The last couple times I've hired, I've had over 100 applications in a 1-week period for the jobs on my team. And I would say 50 to 60 out of those 100 were what I would consider to be qualified. I'm a bit unique. I work with a corporate recruiter at my company, and I actually tell the recruiters, send me every single application. I want to do my own screening. And the recruiters always say, but that's my job. And I'm like, no, I know what I'm looking for. Send me every single one. I'll do my own screening. So then when I'm screening 50 or 60 applications over the course of a week, I literally made a rubric, and this is personally what I look for. I do see a couple other questions.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a couple other questions that have come in while we're answering that, which is I thought what might happen. That's why I figured we could bounce and do that one. I see one on a cover letter, which I'll hold until after the portfolio ones and then pop back to that.
Cool.
Any particular platform you prefer for portfolios when you're reviewing them? And I think that could mean like website type or like Adobe or like there's a bunch of different ways to host it.
Any free website is great. Here's what I'll tell you about a website. I think it's not worth paying for unless you want to be a freelancer, unless you eventually want to like have your own business, have your own LLC. If you think that's a goal of yours, go buy your URL, go buy your domain name. But you can use a lot of free web builders. Google is great, honestly. My husband recently built a portfolio and he literally used Google Sites. It's free. It's part of the G Suite of, with Gmail and everything else. And if you use Google Drive, the G Sites site builder pairs really easily and seamlessly with your Google Drive. You can just pull items right out of Google Drive and put them right in your site. So that's a great tool. Weebly, Weebly is another great free tool. And if you do decide to buy your own domain name, Weebly has a paid version. So you can keep the same site and just convert over to the paid version, but they have a really great, really robust free version also. It doesn't have to be a website. You could literally have like a zipped file of all of your files. I think the website is the really kind of slick way to go. But if you're crunched for time and don't have time to build a website, there's nothing wrong with like just a zipped package file consisting of all your files as well. The other thing I would say, and I know this is easier said than done, but if you build a website, realize that's not really a skill that we use as an instructional designer. When I say my team builds all kinds of things, we've never been asked to build a website. And so yes, it needs to look pretty, but like, don't sweat. Like web design is not really an instructional design skill set. As long as it functions, as long as it's clean, as long as it's easy to navigate and your links work, it can be pretty low tech and pretty simple.
Mackenzie said on that statement that at her company, somebody submitted a PowerPoint, I think recently, a slideshow with the either a PowerPoint or Google Slides, I'm not sure which kind, with their work samples on each slide. So that's like another example of like, they didn't need a website, they just had that option. Mm-hmm. If you're looking for like other ways to host it, any recommendations for a good source for mock-ups? I'm not sure if that would be something that you would kind of speak to, Laurel. Do you have any opinion on that?
By mock-ups, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch this question in the chat. By mock-ups, do you mean like an unfinished piece? Like as
I'm thinking, I mean wireframes or prototypes or
that is
visual in nature, I would imagine.
That is perfectly fine. That's the other thing. Like, let's say you had a whole entire complete polished e-learning that takes someone 15 to 30 minutes to go through. They're probably not going to take the time in the review process to go through the whole entire thing. So a sampling of the whole is perfectly fine. So it could be, 2 to 3 to 4 slides out of the course, or 30 seconds of the video if the whole entire video is 10 to 15 minutes in length, so it's perfectly fine to pull out a snippet that's representative of the whole. And you can put in that little reflection piece, this is a sample of a larger piece, this is one section of a larger piece, to give that context to what it is. Quite frankly, that also makes for smaller file sizes. So it's easier to share, a small segment of something rather than sharing the whole entire large file.
Kind of bouncing back to this, just so I don't lose it, this cover letter one.
Yeah.
Regarding the cover letter, if there's no space to put it, can you add it to your resume? Jessica was asking.
I have done that myself, and I've also seen it done by others. It's perfectly fine if you take your resume and cover letter and put them together in the same document, and then save it as one Word doc or save it as one PDF. Pro tip: I actually really recommend submitting your resumes as PDFs, not as Word documents. We probably in this day and age are all using the same version of Microsoft, but just in case, it's really a shame if you spend a lot of time fiddling with your resume and getting everything lined up perfectly, and then someone opens it on their computer and things shift around. Where if you just go to File, Save it as a PDF and submit that PDF, things don't wiggle around because the PDF really locks it in exactly how you see it and how you designed it. But to answer that question, that's actually a really clever idea. If you have a cover letter that you're really proud of, or if you want to just take that time to tell a bit more of your story, save it in the same document as your resume and submit that in the resume upload location.
While we're on, I'm going to stop share for a second so we can see your face while we're on questions, because there's quite a few. There's more than I expected at first. So I think I'm on Karen's question. It scrolled me up. Okay. What are some definite, this is a good question, I think. What are some definite no-nos in resume and cover letters? Some common errors that you might have seen that are just like, oh, please don't do this one.
I hate to say it, but poor grammar. This is definitely a place to do your proofreading, have some family, friends, coworkers proofread it. Like, this is definitely the place to do your proofreading. Oversharing personal information. This one's tricky. I will say I am not a lawyer and I cannot offer legal advice, but oversharing personal information, so things like medical history, or they just things that are awkward to disclose to a stranger. I've seen some strange comments come through in cover letters. I say a cover letter is a place to tell your story, and that story needs to be why you're relevant for this role, not a sob story of something personal that's happened to you outside of work. Other things, here in the US, it's not common and generally not a good best practice to include your photo on a resume or a cover letter. It's more common in portfolios, and I think that's okay there. I work for a global company, and so we see a lot of applications who come from other countries, and it is very common in other countries to put photos. It's not super common here in the US, and it always just kind of makes me ask the question, like, why? Why do they feel like that was helping them? And so I think that's sort of a no-no. Another thing, I hate to say it, but it's true. Good graphic design is a help. So much of what we do as instructional designers really comes down to making things look pretty. And of course, it needs to be engaging, and of course, it needs to be educational. But we do spend a lot of time, quite frankly, making things look pretty. So if your documents are clean, are easy to read, are modern, it's not that dreaded wall of text. Just having just a really clean, easy to read document is always going to be a win, because that communicates to me that you can do something similar with something on the job, making it clean and easy to read.
To that point, I wonder if you have an opinion on the kind of like colorful, like Canva resumes versus like a plain resume that still uses those like elements, like, because I've seen people debate that, right? Like,
yep, so here's my opinion on that. We work in a creative field. Be creative. It's a really fine line of like what is over the top. But I have hired some old school black and white resumes, and I have hired some really funky, cool, creative colorful resumes. And it's it's a chance to show personality, and I'm okay with that. I think we work in a creative industry. We're not in a very suit and tie, buttoned up, we're not lawyers, and that's a good thing in this case, so it's definitely okay to let your personality show through. But there may be some hiring managers out there may be some industries out there where that's still not okay. And so I say go for it. And if you're not getting results, the graphic design is always an easy thing that you can share up and kind of change out later on.
I think a couple more. There's a couple people just asking if you're hiring contractors. One person asked that.
I'm not, unfortunately. Yeah, no, but there's a lot of points of that's a really good question to bring up though. There's a lot of points of entry into our industry, honestly. If you're looking to be an instructional designer, contract roles are absolutely an option. Going freelance is absolutely an option. Getting a 9 to 5 salary corporate job is absolutely an option. And so for anyone who doesn't know, there's many kind of entry points and exit points into this career. And a lot of people kind of dabble across all those different ways over time. Um, I'm seeing a couple questions come through about the ATS, the applicant tracking systems. I want to answer those. Someone has heard that ATSs don't read PDFs. In my experience, that is not true. The company who I work for absolutely does read PDFs. I've actually never heard that before.
I
So
think it's the Canva resumes that it sometimes doesn't read because it makes them into an image. So
yeah,
if it makes them into an image without any alt text on them, sometimes it doesn't read those,
that
is what
makes
I've heard.
sense.
But it's not the PDF format, I don't think. It's the way it was designed.
That makes sense. And so I would say if you are getting a template from a place like Canva, just make sure that the file type that you are saving it and submitting it as is a PDF. Without going into too much detail here, the company that I work for is this large global enterprise software company, and we actually make an HR system. That's one of the products we sell to our customers, and it's one of the most commonly used HR systems out there in businesses globally. It absolutely receives PDFs. So I think just, Allison has a really good point here. Make sure the file type that you're submitting is a really common file type. PDF is one of the file types. If you're submitting it as an image may not be readable by those systems. So I would avoid things like JPEGs, that might not be readable by an ATS system.
I think I think what happens is people will have images, because I've seen resumes like this too, where they'll have an image in the PDF and then like that part's not getting read, but it's because it's an image.
That makes sense.
And I have seen that, and it is tricky with the ATS. Do you want to go on to the rest of your slides and then we'll bump into these?
Yeah.
Because I do think you had a lot to say about interviews.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of get to that and bounce back. We've got a lot of good questions here, but
yeah, thank you.
This will also be valuable and maybe generate some thought as we get into other questions.
Yeah, so just half a slide more as Allison's getting back there. Interviews. So first couple tips of advice I have, be concise. We all get nervous, we ramble. I might be doing some of that here myself right now. So again, this one's easier said than done, but being concise and being confident, really the two best tips I have for you as you go through interviews. The reason why I chose these two pieces of advice to give you, a really common first question or sort of first prompt in an interview is, so tell me about yourself. And again, they're not looking for the life story. Really the best answer to so tell me about yourself question is, how are you the right fit for that job? They want to hear about what makes you the best person, the best candidate for that role. So that's where you can really be concise. They're not looking for your whole life story. They're looking for you to tell them why you're the right fit for that job. The confidence, again, I know this is easier said than done, but one of the things that I learned all the way back in student teaching, my first time stepping in place in a classroom, is having that teacher persona, and just that fake it till you make it, have that persona that tough as nails, you can take on the world, you can stare down any kid, any parent, any administrator who's challenging you. Carrying that persona into an interview is probably a good idea. I look for confidence in my instructional designers because I know they're going to be going out and talking to other stakeholders across our business who don't understand our process, who don't understand education, and they're going to be representing me and my team and our way of doing things, oftentimes when they're the only one from our team in that virtual conversation. And they have to have that persona and that presence to get the job done and to really instill trust and instill confidence in others. So the two biggest kind of soft skill piece of advice that I can give you for interviews: be concise, be confident. Something else that I see oftentimes when I've interviewed teachers, they call me Miss Schuler, which always just kind of makes me smile because I haven't heard that in over 10 years. In the corporate world, everybody goes by first names. I could approach the CEO of my company and call him by his first name. And so in the corporate world, when you're talking to hiring managers, recruiters, just default to their first name. Hi, so-and-so, dear so-and-so, and we're not Mr. or Miss in the corporate world. A lot of interviews today are Zoom interviews, much like the call we're on today. I really recommend having a clean background. A fake background is fine. The blurred background is fine. But just something clean, not distracting, no dirty laundry, dirty dishes. So just nice, clean background for video interviews, especially for a remote role, because they'll be looking at you thinking, wow, if this is where you're interviewing, where are you going to be when you talk to our business stakeholders? So a nice, clean background is always a great tip. Next up, discuss your portfolio work sample. So you've spent a lot of time putting this portfolio together, making sure you submit it with your initial application. Shame on the hiring manager if they forgot that you're the person who had the amazing portfolio, but sometimes people just get busy and they don't always match the person they're speaking to mentally with the nice applications they saw. So whenever you're asked those situational questions, tell me about a time where you've done this, or how would you do this, or how would you use education or learning to solve this problem? If you have a portfolio work sample that is really proof of that, tie your answer back to your portfolio. Your portfolio is the evidence that you have done this and that you can do it again. And so make sure you tie back interview questions to your portfolio work samples to really remind them, I'm that person who had that awesome portfolio, and that's why you called me for this interview in the first place. So that's a great piece of advice that I have. A lot of interviews end with them asking you, what questions do you have for me? Always try and have at least some, even if they've already been answered somewhere else in the interview process, try and have some questions just ready to go for that point in time. You can ask questions about the role to really help better understand a typical day in the job, career progression from that role, why the role is open. Is the team growing? Has someone left? Get a good idea about the role. Get a good idea about the team. How big is the team? Would you be a team of one? Now, if there's more than one on the team, what other job descriptions are on the team? How long have they been there? Can you talk to them? So use this opportunity to really ask questions to help you make a good assessment of them. I think oftentimes in interviews, the power dynamic is really off. The person doing the interview is in the seat of power. But remember, this is your chance for you to be interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So you really make sure that you're making a good move that's right for you and for your life and for your family by uprooting yourself and changing careers and changing jobs. And so definitely make sure that you use the interview as a chance to get any questions that you have answered. Next up, I think this is probably the biggest change from coming out of public education. If you're working with a company that has a recruiter, that's typically the person you're going to talk to about things like pay. It is perfectly acceptable to ask the recruiter, what's the pay range for this job? The recruiter might bring it up first, and if they don't, it will not reflect poorly on you to ask what the pay range is. I always recommend getting an idea of what the pay range is as early as possible in the process, just to make sure everyone is on the same playing field about what the outcome is going to be should they offer you a job. Here's my other piece of advice. Again, big change coming from public education. If you do get an offer from a for-profit company, so for-profit meaning anyone who is in business to make money, anyone who has a .com, anyone who is selling a product, selling a service, they are for-profit business. If they give you a job offer, I highly recommend asking for 10 to 20% more than they offer you. They won't always say yes, but sometimes they will. And I have never in my years of experience heard of a job offer being rescinded or taken away just because someone negotiated for more money at the end. Again, they won't always say yes. Sometimes they might say no, but sometimes they will come back and say yes, and good on you. You just gave yourself a raise. So in the corporate world, salaries aren't as linear as they are in a lot of K-12 education spaces. I know a lot of states will pay you a certain amount based on your years of experience or based on your degree or based on a certification. And it's very linear. It's all public knowledge. In the corporate world, there's a lot more gray area. There's often big discrepancies from teams, from team to team, and individual to individual, company to company. Some states are now required to post the range. Not all places are, not all states are. With so many jobs being remote, the job may be posted in one place, but you may live in a different place. So you won't always know the roles you won't always know the ranges if it's not posted. So it's okay to ask, and it's okay to ask for more. If they tell you upfront the cap is a certain amount, you really can't go above the cap. But you can always ask, and when you do ask, try and have a reason to back it up. If you get the feeling throughout the interview process, there's a certain thing that you've said or that you've done that they're very interested in. So, a certain experience they've really responded well to you describing, or a certain portfolio piece, they're really impressed with how you built it or why you built it. Use that as evidence for how you can bring that same skill, that same talent to their work that they're doing there. And always have a reason to kind of back up your claim for why you're asking for more. All right.
I'm gonna
yeah,
stop the share on that because it's getting really glitchy on my end, and I think we were pretty close to the end, so I apologize for that, but it's starting to give me the error I think you were getting earlier.
no problem. Yep. So we'll go ahead and stop there with my presentation. But really, my time is your time. I'm here for Q&A. I'd love to hear what more questions do you all have?
So there were some that we got submitted via the form that I want to kind of call out here, and then there's plenty in the chat also to call out, but just some that I know we got in advance, and they also are similar to a couple in the chat. How do we sell our teaching experience specifically as L&D is one that's come up a lot, as well as this idea of like, how do we stand out? I think it was Becca that asked that, like, how do I stand out if there's so many teachers?
Yeah.
I think a couple people actually might have asked it, but I saw Becca's.
Yeah. So when I hear the question, how do you sell your teaching experience? A bit of advice here, be honest. If you've never been a corporate instructional designer, don't artificially inflate your resume to use disingenuous adjectives, disingenuous descriptions of what you've done. Be really honest about what your experience is, but be really proud of what your experience is. Honestly, I'll go back to one of the first things I said here tonight. It never ceases to surprise me how few people in corporate L&D have degrees and have experience in education. So your degrees, your experience is absolutely a distinguishing factor, and it is a plus in my opinion. And so think about the experiences you have that are really universal. You all have experiences teaching content aligned to certain learning objectives. You all have experience assessing learners' performance. You all have experience finding creative ways to make boring topics engaging and effective. You all have experience working with difficult stakeholders. These are all things that you have done. And so really think back to the experiences that you have are universal, and be honest about what you've done and what you've not done, but be proud of what you've done, because you have a very reputable, very honorable career, that you've invested years of your life into. And it's okay that you're making the change. And one piece of advice that was given to me when I left teaching, because teaching was my identity, like I'm sure it is for many of you. It's what I went to college for. I moved out of state to be a teacher when I couldn't find a job here in my home state. It's the only thing I ever wanted to do in my whole entire life. And I really had to grieve like a loss when I left, even though I chose to leave. And a piece of advice that someone gave me, and it took years before I really understood this to the full extent, someone sat me down and said, Laurel, you didn't fail the teaching profession. The profession failed you. And I don't want to stand in a soapbox and rail about all the reasons why teachers are leaving, because the world needs good teachers. But if I can leave you with one thing, it's you didn't fail the profession failed you. So realize you've done a fantastic job. You've done an honorable job. You have a lot of skills that a lot of other people in corporate L&D don't have. It's a very common path into corporate L&D to take someone who is good at a corporate job and make them a trainer of that job, or take someone who is good at that job and make them a manager of that job. And just because they could do the job as an individual contributor doesn't always make them the best trainer, doesn't always make them the best manager. And so having that educational expertise is an asset that you bring, and that's how you sell your teaching experience.
I think there was one that came up a couple of times in the submitted ones. I'm not seeing it in the chat now, but I think that's worth addressing, which was a few people asked us in the form submissions about ageism. They were worried. They've been teaching for a long time, like you said. And they were worried, like, I've been teaching 20 years. I'm worried that trying to transition into corporate environments, either ed tech or instructional design, I think we got one on each, and we can talk about ed tech maybe after this question. So we got a few questions on that. What is your advice about like how to combat ageism in ways that people can combat it? Obviously, it shouldn't be happening, but if it is potentially happening to people, and we know that the reality is, unfortunately, that sometimes can happen, how can they protect themselves against that a little bit?
I think the concern with ageism, people who have been working in any industry for years and years, the perception might be that they are out of touch. So I would combat that proactively by discussing things that you're doing that are recent. What is recent professional development that you've done? Is there a conference you've gone to, a book you've read? What are some recent trends, recent innovations? Really make an effort to show that you are up to date on what people are doing and talking about and thinking about in today's current world. Talk about changes that you've made. How have you innovated your practices over time? And I think by showing that you are up to speed with modern current events, I think really is a good thing. And again, this goes back to the confidence. Recognize the wisdom of your years is a good thing. And I said this earlier, but by design, I have hired for age diversity on my team, along with any other facet of diversity that you can think of. I wouldn't want a team of people who are all at the same point in their career, because that weakens the teams in different ways. And so age diversity can absolutely be a benefit as much as any other factor that people can look at.
And then we did have some questions asked about like finding a job in ed tech, which I know is a different space than you're in. So what is your thought about like instructional design maybe in ed tech spaces, and that versus like what looking for a job in ed tech looks like? I know we've talked about this a little bit and you had kind of a take on that I thought was helpful.
If you're looking for jobs as an instructional designer in an ed tech space, I think if you have any personal connection to that tool, to that system, to that software, whatever it might be, definitely highlight that in your resume or cover letter. So an example I have, and this is ancient history, but back in 2007, when I was student teaching, I was at one of the first schools in Michigan to get smartboards. So we were a smartboard pilot school back in those days. I see someone nodding. Yep. And then I went and taught in North Carolina, and the school where I taught in North Carolina had one smartboard in the library that we had to sign out, and no one knew what it was. So most days it just sat there unused. And so because I had this experience from student teaching, I knew what it was. I went down there and I was using it. And then other folks caught on. Had I wanted to pursue a job at Smartboard, let's just say, I would tell that story and I would talk about the innovative ways the school in Michigan used it, how I led the way in North Carolina for the teachers down there to learn how to use it. So if you have a connection like that with a certain company and you apply to a role at their company, tell that story. Talk about your personal connection, how you've used that tool, how you've trained others in that tool, how you perceive they could market their tool to others like yourself. So like show what insight you have from your experience with that. Totally changing perspectives here. One thing I will say, I think it's a common mistake a lot of transitioning teachers make to only look for jobs in the ed tech industry. I want to call out instructional design exists everywhere in every industry. I work for a non-ed tech company, but it's also a software company. Instructional designers exist in technology, in healthcare, in higher education, in oil and gas, in communications, in Hollywood, wherever, instructional designers exist in all industries. And I think there's a lot of competition of people who are exactly like yourself in the ed tech space, because it's what you all know. So I'd really encourage you to really branch out and explore other opportunities. I began my career at a smaller company than where I work now. And I think oftentimes it's easier to find those jobs at the smaller, more local companies, places that people haven't heard of, places that aren't household names. That can be a great place to start because there's not as much competition to get in there. But I think if you're only limiting yourself to one industry, that's just it. You're limiting yourself. And I think that you stand better prospects of casting a really wide net and opening your search to other industries. I assume most of you are on LinkedIn. It's probably how you found this group and this event tonight. Do a search at LinkedIn for instructional design remote or instructional design in your geographic area. And you may find good luck looking at jobs at companies that you've never heard of, because they're going to get less applications because no one's ever heard of them.
I wanted to talk about time real quick. It is about 8:20. I don't know how long you can stay with us, Laurel. I know we had planned for 8:30. And we have quite a few questions left. Do you think you could hang on till like 8:45, or do you have something immediately?
Let's do it. I'm great with 8:45.
We're gonna do a little bit of a speed round. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but we'll get to like some of the more common ones. There's a couple of people asking about different types of work to put on their portfolio in really specific ways. And I don't know if we can cover each specific way, but I do want to kind of cover like what kinds of things do you look for? And you already kind of covered the template thing, like the idea of like kind of change up your templates and so forth. But is there anything that makes, I think the heart of this was somebody said like, oh, my education templates are corporate templates and I use them for teacher PD. Is that going to stand out as bad? So what makes something look like corporate to you besides it just not being for kids? Because those are for adults anyway, right?
Yeah.
So what makes something look corporate to you, and what are assets that you really want to see in a portfolio? Just like you should have one of each of these.
Because my team works in multimedia, for lack of a better word, I look for multimedia. So I like to see, do they have a video? Do they have a document? Do they have a PowerPoint? And I don't mean to rattle off a list of like 10 different things and tell you have to have 10 different things. I would say having 3 or 4 strong things is better than like 10 or 15 weak things, honestly. But I like to see multimedia. Sort of a really nice surprise to see is if somebody has an e-learning or video with voiceover, their own voice. Personal pet peeve. I hate those AI robotic voices. And so I think, nobody really likes those. And so like that's like an automatic, like, turn off for me. But a nice video with nice narration or a nice e-learning with narration, my team has to do our own narration for our own videos and for our own e-learnings. And getting someone who is comfortable recording their own voice is always kind of a win, honestly. So that's nice to see, but I like to see multimedia. And so again, how can they work in the different media, whether it's e-learning, video, PowerPoint, that, a nice, well-rounded skill set is great. Other side of that opinion, some people really do like to specialize. Some people love e-learning design. Some people love training facilitation. So if you think you want to specialize in a certain area, there is nothing wrong or no shame in only featuring one thing if that's the specific path you want to go down. Or if you want to be more of a generalist, having that multimedia approach can be really beneficial.
Eliana asked a couple times about customer success positions, which I don't think you could speak to directly, but I don't know if you have any opinions on what is the best practice for folks looking for customer success positions. I do know that's like a different role, but I imagine that your company has some, just like any tech company that I've seen has some. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Customer success is really an entirely different industry. It's not in the learning industry. And so my company does have those positions, but they're actually who we consider our audience of learners. So my company does instructional design for people who work in sales and marketing, and customer success falls under sales at my company. So I don't have a lot of insight in how to navigate a job search in that industry. I did see a question come through the chat about portfolios for customer success. I don't believe that's a role that would require one, honestly, because that's not a role that produces assets in that nature. A customer success role is really looking more for customer service. The mission of a customer success role is to make sure that the company can retain their customers and not lose them. So anything you can do in that process to highlight your customer service skills would be of benefit to you.
I have seen a couple ed tech roles that are like customer success hybrid, like resource creation, like creating like guides for customers, basically like customer education, customer success. And I think that's maybe causing the confusion for some folks because they label them the same. So that's just another kind of call out. And I think Mackenzie called this out in the chat too. Like people call things all kinds of things. So like that's just one of the things you wade through with job ads. And Laurel is speaking to what these roles mean on her team, and somebody else might have a role called the same thing, and then they do totally different things, and that's the fun of it all. It's
That's an excellent point, and that gets right back to, if you get the chance to interview, ask some questions about the role and what the role is like, what the team is like, just to really make sure that you have a good understanding of what you're interviewing for.
Is it beneficial to reach out to hiring managers if you can find them when you apply? Does that make any difference in your opinion?
That's really going to come down to personal opinion, honestly. Some people like the outreach, some people don't. I can't say it's ever made a difference in whether I've hired someone or not. Personally, I don't tend to have conversations outside of the hiring process. I shared earlier on this call, the last several times that I've hired, we've had the job posted externally for about a week, and I get over 100 applications in that week. That week, my LinkedIn lights up, like notifications all day, every day. And I found that one, I get a volume of outreach that I simply can't manage. I don't respond to them for that reason. And two, it's really not fair if some people get to have these little secret side conversations and other applications don't. And so I always tell people when they reach out to me, if you're interested in the role, I encourage you to apply. I tell them that I review every application myself, which I do. I told that story earlier in this call. And then I don't really engage in side conversations outside of the formal process, just in the interest of fairness and also in the interest of just my own time and what I can respect for myself.
Somebody asked, this is a fairly straightforward yes or no question. You spoke about first names before. When you're writing a cover letter, would you write Mr., Mrs. or first name, or does it matter?
That's a good point. I think for a cover letter, you could really do either. But honestly, first name's all right. Like we all go by first names. I have never in my corporate world heard anyone referred to as their last name. Everyone is on a first name basis.
Do you know of a place where aspiring IDs can practice mock interviews at all? Have you ever heard of a place like that?
A couple things. This wouldn't necessarily be practice for yourself, but I know this is something that's really commonly done on YouTube. So you can certainly watch others do mock interviews. If you go to YouTube and do a search for this, you will find it. Something I really wanted to mention is there's an organization called ATD, the Association for Talent Development. Highly recommend everyone look them up. Their website is td.org. Promise I'm not being paid by them to promote them, but this has been a game changer for me in my career and getting involved with this organization. ATD has local chapters all across the US. And so if you go to td.org and look up chapters and put in your zip code, chances are you'll find one that's hopefully not too far away from you, because there's several chapters all across the US. And the chapters do local events like this. They do local programming, local networking, local professional development, and you can find mentors through there. You can find job opportunities through there, and that could potentially be a place where people can do mock interviews. I have heard of local ATD chapters doing mock interviews. So where that's not a specific recommendation, that's something that you can certainly look for to find. I really can't speak highly enough about getting involved with ATD as an organization. It's a wealth of information about the industry as a whole, and it can offer you some really great local networking in your local communities.
A good one here. You mentioned don't overinflate, be honest, right? Like a little while back. So Lindsay asked, for not overinflating our resumes, are you saying we shouldn't translate our teacher lingo to ID lingo, like changing students to learners or state standards to learning objectives? Are there any translations that you're good with and any translations that feel weird to you that you can think of as examples? Or
yeah, again, my personal opinion, I see no harm in the two that you just called out, Allison. So, calling it learning objectives, that's the phrase we use in the corporate world. I think students to learners is relatively harmless. I've seen some hot takes on both sides of this argument on LinkedIn with other people. If the words feel genuine and accurate to you, go ahead and use them. And your experience better than anyone else. But if the words feel like putting on a costume, putting on makeup, if it feels foreign to your own experience, if someone were to ask you to elaborate on that and you couldn't elaborate genuinely using the same verbiage, don't use that verbiage. Again, there's nothing bad or wrong about your experience. It is going to be an uphill battle at times, showing certain hiring managers that your skills are transferable. But I think you're going to get further being genuine to yourself and to the experiences that you've had than trying to put on some sort of a facade. I personally don't always respond well when I see teachers listing what is clearly a classroom teaching role and calling themselves instructional designer, because that's just not a title that's used in the K-12 world. And it makes me question if they're being completely authentic and realistic about how they're representing everything. I see no shame in calling yourself a teacher. You were a teacher. It's it's not bad. It is who you were, and it's a job that requires a degree and a skill set, and a lot of the same skills that we use every single day in my instructional design career. I think I said this point earlier, but on my team, I've hired people directly out of teaching. I've hired people directly out of higher education, and those aren't the only people in the world who've made the same transition. And so again, I just go back to be authentic and genuine in describing yourself. If for no other reason than so you don't get tongue-tied in the interview process trying to use words that aren't part of your natural vocabulary.
This one by Beth is interesting, talking about interviews. So if in an interview I'm asked about something that I don't have experience with yet, is it looked poorly upon to answer that I don't, but I'm willing to go above and beyond to learn it? Or I'm going to add on to Beth's there and say, like, what would you say? Like, I don't have experience with this. What other things could people say to kind of show that above and beyond that Beth is talking about?
How I've handled this question personally when I've been interviewing, I'd say what I would do, I can't think of a time where I've done that, but here's how I would approach that. And you have to pivot and think on your feet. And that's a skill that we all have as teachers, honestly, So you want to be honest. And I think it's better to pivot and say how you would address that than to just let the question fall flat and say, no, I haven't. Because then there's kind of nowhere else you can go from there.
And I think one of the most common places I see this personally, and teachers ask me about personally, is with tech. Like, oh, I haven't used X program. Like, do you, as a hiring manager, like, if I say, oh, I haven't used Lectora, and I don't think you guys use Lectora, and you happen to use Lectora, but I'd use Captivate and I'd use Storyline. Like, I think like a lot of times, or I haven't used Asana and you guys use Asana, but I've used Trello and I've used Smartsheet. Like,
right.
Does that matter as much to you, the specific thing? And I think that's probably going to vary by hiring manager, but what's your kind of hot take on that? Like when people have adjacent things, like, oh, I haven't used your LMS, but I've used Canvas or Blackboard.
My hot take, I will say this is not an opinion that is widely shared. My hot take is if you have used a tool, any one of these tools, you can very easily learn its peer tools in the industry. I am very LMS agnostic. If you've used one, you can probably use all of them. I have a favorite authoring tool. It's Articulate Storyline. But if you've used, Captivate or any of the others that are out there, you can probably learn Storyline. All of these are meant to be used by end users. They don't require coding. They don't require special training. If you've done one, you can do them all. If someone has never used an authoring tool, I might be a little more reluctant to hire them into an instructional design role. But again, there's other jobs like LMS admin does not require knowledge of an authoring tool. Technical writer does not require knowledge of an authoring tool. All of the authoring tools offer free trials. And so you're not going to get 100% proficient off of a free trial, but you can play with it and you can put together a work sample and you can get it a feel for, is this something that I would enjoy doing full-time on a job and using every single day or not? But my hot take, to get back to the question, is if you've learned one, you can learn them all, and they're not that difficult to learn. So it would not prevent me from hiring someone who's not used the exact skills, the exact tools that we use. I think that's an unfair bias against a person because let's be real, unless you're freelancing, no one pays for these tools out of pocket. You only have exposure to what your employers use. And so it's not really a fair bias to say, oh, well, you haven't worked somewhere that used our exact tools. It just, I think that's an unfair thing to hold against a candidate. But it is common that hiring managers do get married to a particular set of tools and they want someone who can hit the ground running in their tools. So that is a common barrier that applicants have to overcome.
And I can say that, like, in my company, we've hired since I've been there, and we do a lot of like, we all have a kind of like, we read the stuff and all that. There were times where we were like, we don't care if you've used Storyline when we were hiring some. And there were times where it was like, oh no, we don't have enough people to make Storyline things. Like, we really need somebody who's good at Storyline for this role. Yeah. So it's going to depend on the needs. Like, that hiring manager one day might be like, oh, we really need it. Because I have this backlog of work. And sometimes they might not. So it's just, It's so hard to
Yeah.
know.
And some places, even with the instructional design title, will separate out. Some folks literally do the consultation and the storyboarding, and it's a whole other team who does the development and authoring tool. So you may find an employer that's really looking for that consultation, that design aspect, and then someone else is the developer. And so again, this really varies place by place.
And they might not write the job ad that specifically, so read it and all that, but also know that sometimes they're copy pasting it looks like from other people. I'm sure yours are better.
A question I definitely want to call out. Someone asked, how can you learn Storyline for free? Storyline has a free trial. I believe it's 60 days. So there's one way right there. Lots of YouTube videos about Storyline. The best resource I had when I was brand new, starting out in my first instructional design role, look at the eLearning Heroes challenges. This is a weekly challenge that Articulate puts out for free every single week. And they give you a topic, a theme. They've been doing this for close to a decade. So there's literally hundreds of these things you can go back on. So you can do a fresh new one every single week, or you can go back for close to a decade of previous challenges and do the old ones just for fun. And let me tell you, these challenges make phenomenal portfolio pieces. Because they're topics like do something more interesting than bullets, or use this special feature, or they're just really quick, snappy little things. And because portfolio pieces don't have to be a whole entire course, it can just be a segment of a course. If you do these challenges, you'll build some really fun, cool, creative things, and these can make great portfolio pieces, and they're great opportunities to learn.
I'm going to ask one more question in just a minute. I will point out, Michelle said they have gone down to 30 days, which is true. But I also have known people who have gotten extensions. If you've emailed them and said, I'm a teacher working on a portfolio piece, can I please have more time? And I've known some people got 15-day extensions, and some people even got like 2 15-day extensions. So it is possible, I think, to still get those 60 days, but you have to work with the Articulate team, because there are people kind of, trying to use their product for free, and they are running a business. They're a .com just like everybody else. But one last question. I think this is a good one to kind of end on, because it's something I see a lot. How important is it to use quantifiable information in a resume? Numbers, percentages, basically like those KPIs, if teachers can find them, those key progress indicators, and what ones matter is what I'm going to add to Eliana's question there. What particular numbers, because you can add a bunch of numbers that don't matter, but which ones kind of stick out to you as being really useful?
That's an excellent question. It is important. At the end of the day, your business is in the business of making money. And training is often seen as something that costs money. Unfortunately, not always seen as something that earns money. And businesses are very concerned with what is their return on their investment. And so my team often thinks, we create training for free because we're not charging our other employees anything for our training. But our training is actually very expensive. Our salaries create their training. Our Articulate licenses create their training. Any training that we go out and do, any professional development that we do is funded by the business. So the training that we give to our employees for free is very expensive for the business to create. So the business is very concerned with what is their return on their investment? Are they going to make money based on whatever you and your team of instructional designers put together? So anything you can do to show quantifiable impact, and really go beyond things like completion and attendance records. I always cringe when I see I trained this many hundreds of people, or we had a 100% completion rate. Okay, that's great, but that's attendance. Like, what is the impact of what you have done? So anytime you can quantifiably show the impact of what you have done, that's where you're really going to catch somebody's eye in a good way.
I think that is a good place to kind of wrap up. Are there any other last words of wisdom you want to share, Laurel, before we kind of close out? I'm not sure if we got to everything that was on your list of experiences.
Yeah. I just want to encourage you all. Don't give up. If this is your dream, stick with it. Just thank you for your time tonight. I invite you all to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn. If you Google me, you will find me. For better or worse, I'm the only person in the world with this name. So look me up, you will find me. And I just really encourage you to build that network, and keep looking for the experiences that you're having. When you're job searching, don't be shy about it. Tell everyone you know. that this is what you're looking for. Ask family and friends to introduce you to people in their network. And I wish you all the best of luck in your search.
Thank you so much for joining us, Laurel. The recording of this will be up hopefully by the weekend. We'll get it cleaned up and get it up on the website for everybody if you do want to review it for any reason, and we'll send out an email with kind of the review of that's available. If you wanted to, I saw some people drop their links in there and I didn't get to see everybody's who dropped in, but if you want to connect with me, you can certainly, like, if you're not already connected with me, you can certainly reach out to me. Laurel, if people want to connect with you, they can find you on LinkedIn. You're the only Laurel Schuler that I think will come up. And we really thank you for joining us. And thank you so much, Laurel, for walking us through so many helpful questions. It was a delight to have you. And I'm going to kind of stop our recording first and foremost.